World War II. It was the deadliest, most destructive war in human history. Over 70 million people lost their lives. Entire cities were wiped off the map, and the world was changed forever. It's a conflict so massive, so complex, that it can feel overwhelming to understand. But how did it all happen? What were the key turning points that led to this global catastrophe? Today, we're going to break it down. We'll cut through the complexity and explore World War II through 10 key moments that defined the conflict and shaped the world we live in today. This is World War II. Explained simply, our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the aftermath of another war. It all started with one man and a nation's anger. Moment uno, Hitler's rise to power. After World War I, Germany was a broken nation. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed harsh penalties, leaving the country economically crippled, militarily restricted, and deeply humiliated. This created a fertile ground for extremism. A charismatic and ruthless figure, Adolf Hitler, tapped into this widespread anger and resentment. He promised to restore Germany's national pride, rebuild its economy, and reclaim its lost power. His fiery speeches and nationalist rhetoric resonated with millions. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. It was a pivotal moment. He quickly dismantled the country's democratic institutions, silenced opposition, and transformed Germany into a totalitarian dictatorship under the control of the Nazi Party. With absolute power, Hitler began secretly rearming the nation, tearing up international treaties, and setting his sights on territorial expansion. The stage was being set for a conflict that would engulf the globe. The world watched with growing unease, but for years, little was done to stop him. Moment 2. The invasion of Poland. The world held its breath throughout the late 1930s as Hitler's aggression grew. He had already annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia, with other world powers choosing appeasement over confrontation, hoping to avoid another war. But Hitler's ambitions were limitless. His next target was Poland. On September 1st, 1939, the breaking point was reached. Under the false pretext of a Polish attack on German soil, Nazi Germany launched a full-scale invasion of Poland. The assault was swift and brutal. This act of unprovoked aggression was a line that could not be undone. Britain and France, having pledged to defend Poland, issued an ultimatum to Germany: withdraw your troops or face war. Hitler ignored the warning. 2 days later, on September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had officially begun. The invasion of Poland wasn't just a military campaign. It was the spark that ignited a global firestorm. Moment 3. Blitzkrieg. Germany's lightning war. In the opening stages of the war, Germany unleashed a revolutionary and terrifying new military doctrine: the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This wasn't the slow trench warfare of World War I. Blitzkrieg was all about speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. It was a coordinated assault. First, dive bombers would terrorize and disrupt enemy lines from the air. Immediately after, fast-moving panzer tank divisions would punch through defenses, followed by motorized infantry, who would encircle and destroy the remaining enemy forces. This strategy was devastatingly effective. Poland fell in just a few weeks. Then, in 1940, Germany turned its attention west. Countries that had held out for 4 years in the First World War, like Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even the mighty France, were conquered in a matter of weeks. The speed of the German advance was shocking. By the summer of 1940, Nazi Germany controlled most of Western and Central Europe. Britain now stood alone. Moment 4. The Battle of Britain. With France defeated, Hitler was confident that Britain would sue for peace. But under the defiant leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Britain refused to surrender. Hitler's plan was to invade the British Isles, but to do that, he first needed to control the skies. So, in the summer of 1940, the German Air Force, the Luft, began a massive air campaign to destroy Britain's Royal Air Force, the RAF. This was the Battle of Britain. For months, German bombers pounded British airfields, factories, and eventually, cities like London in a bombing campaign known as the Blitz. Day after day, night after night, the sky was a battlefield, but the British fought back with incredible courage. The skilled pilots of the RF, flying their iconic Spitfire and Hurricane fighters, inflicted heavy losses. On the Luftwaffe, aided by a new technology called radar, they could see the German attacks coming. As Churchill famously said of the RF pilots, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Beatiatum, it was clear Germany could not achieve air superiority. Hitler was forced to postpone his invasion plans indefinitely. The Battle of Britain was Germany's first major defeat of the war, and a crucial turning point. It proved the Nazis were not invincible. Moment 5. Hitler attacks the Soviet Union. In 1939, just before invading Poland, Hitler had shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with his ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. This deal allowed Hitler to focus on conquering Western Europe without fear of a two-front war. But Hitler never intended to honor the pact. His ultimate goal was to conquer the vast lands of the Soviet Union for German living space. On June 22, 1941, Hitler made what many consider his single greatest mistake. He launched Operation Barbarossa, a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest land invasion in history, involving over 3 million German soldiers. Initially, the attack was a stunning success. The German army pushed deep into Soviet territory, capturing millions of soldiers and vast resources. They reached the outskirts of Moscow, but the Soviet Union was enormous, and its people resisted fiercely. The brutal Russian winter set in, a foe the German army was not prepared for. The invasion stalled, and the Eastern Front became a grueling, nightmarish war of attrition. This decision opened a massive second front that would bleed the German army dry for the next 4 years. Moment 6. Pearl Harbor. America enters the war. While Europe was ablaze, the United States had remained officially neutral, though it was supplying aid to the Allies. Many Americans wanted to stay out of what they saw as another European conflict. But on the other side of the world, another power, Imperial Japan, was expanding its empire across Asia. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japan launched a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. In just a few hours, the Japanese strike force crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet, sinking or damaging numerous battleships and killing over 2,400 Americans. The attack was meant to deliver a knockout blow that would keep the U.S. out of the war in the Pacific. It had the exact opposite effect. The attack on Pearl Harbor shocked and outraged the American public. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy, and the United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States. The conflicts in Europe and Asia had now merged into one. America, the sleeping giant, had been awakened. The war was now truly global. Moment 7. The Holocaust. Behind the front lines of the war, the Nazi regime was carrying out one of the most horrific crimes in human history. The Holocaust. Fueled by a deeply anti-Semitic and racist ideology, the Nazis systematically targeted European Jews for persecution and extermination. What began with discriminatory laws, forced ghettos, and violent pogroms escalated into a state-sponsored genocide. Jews, along with millions of others deemed undesirable, including Roma, Poles, disabled people, political opponents, and more, were rounded up and transported to concentration and extermination camps, like Auschwitz. In these death camps, millions were murdered in gas chambers, shot, or died from starvation, disease, and forced labor. By the end of the war, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children had been murdered. The Holocaust stands as a terrifying testament to the depths of human cruelty and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked hatred and intolerance. Momento Chodide, the turning point in the West. By 1944, the tide of the war was turning. The Soviets were pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front, and Allied forces had invaded Italy. But to defeat Germany, the Allies needed to open a major second front in Western Europe. After years of planning, the moment came on June 6, 1944. This day is known as D-Day. In the largest amphibious invasion in military history, over 150,000 Allied troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations landed on the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy in German-occupied France. The fighting on the beaches, especially Omaha Beach, was ferocious, and casualties were immense. But the Allies managed to establish a beachhead. From this foothold, they began to pour millions more troops and supplies into France. D-Day was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. It forced Hitler to fight a major war on 3 fronts in Russia, in Italy, and now in France. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Moment 9. The fall of Berlin and Hitler's death. Following the success of D-Day, Allied forces pushed across France, liberating Paris in August 1944. From TI East, the Soviet Red Army was relentlessly advancing, pushing the German army back through Eastern Europe and into Germany itself. By the spring of 1945, Germany was being squeezed from both sides. In April 1945, Soviet forces reached the outskirts of Berlin, the heart of the Nazi regime. A final, brutal battle for the city began. As Soviet shells rained down on the capital, Hitler, who had retreated to a bunker deep beneath the city, finally faced reality. His 1,000-year empire was collapsing in ruins around him. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet soldiers just streets away, Adolf Hitler took his own life. A few days later, on Mai 8, Germany formally surrendered. This day became known as V-Day, for victory in Europe. After nearly 6 long years of brutal conflict, the war in Europe was finally over. But the fight was not yet finished. Moment 10. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even with Germany's surrender, the war in the Pacific raged on. Imperial Japan remained a formidable and fanatical opponent, fighting for every inch of territory. American military planners predicted that a land invasion of Japan could cost up to 1 million Allied casualties, and even more Japanese lives. In this context, U.S. President Harry Truman made a fateful decision. He authorized the use of a new, terrifying weapon: the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The explosion was unlike anything the world had ever seen, instantly killing tens of thousands and leveling the city. When Japan still did not surrender, a second atomic bomb was dropped 3 days later on the city of Nagasaki, with similar devastating results. The sheer destructive power of these weapons was unimaginable. Faced with this new reality and a Soviet invasion of Manchuria, Emperor Hirohito intervened. On August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. On September 2nd, 1945, the formal surrender documents were signed. World War II was finally over. From Hitler's rise to the ashes of Hiroshima, these 10 moments chart the course of a war that reshaped our planet. The end of the war led to the fall of empires, the creation of new nations, the dawn of the nuclear age, and the formation of the United Nations. Organization born from the desire to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The history of World War II is a somber reminder of the immense cost of war, the dangers of ideology, and the precious value of peace and understanding. By understanding these key moments, we honor the memory of the millions who suffered and died, and we arm ourselves with the knowledge to strive for a better, more peaceful future. If you found this breakdown of history valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories, explained simply. Thanks for watching.